alright at the moment while I'm not having a hot flush, I'm alright. Anyway, if I have a hot flush, I will be complaining.
Sorry for that.
Oh no, I don't get worse in the middle of the night. I'm sure you might miss out on the ball, you never know. I mean, the bed. Hi, Carlton.
Hello. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right, thanks. How are you?
All right.
That's good. You use your aircon on the weekend? Sunday.
There was a hot day.
Yeah.
Sunday was actually pleasant.
Oh, really?
Well, no, there was a day that we had a working bee. That was like
Saturday.
yeah, that was a hot day, but we were up. No.
You were home.
But I was home for an hour.
Right. Yes, it's nice, isn't it? I'm going to take that off.
Yeah. And the page number in the contract. Yes. All right, so good morning. We'll start with hi. So we're doing, let's do the Heart Sutra. Is that what we're doing?
Yes, Heart Sutra.
All right. Let's try it, at least for once.
I prostrate
Yeah,
I
I triple jam that one time.
Together with a great community amongst the great community of Bodhisattvas.
At that time,
I was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena of perception.
also at that time, the
Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara
looked
upon
upon
the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom
and beheld those five
aggregates
aggregates
also as empty of inherent nature.
Then, through the power of
The Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara. How should any son with any strain who wishes to practice the activity of profound perfection of wisdom
He said that the Bodhisattva Aryabhakeshvara said this to Venerable Shariputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter who wishes to practice the activity of profound perfection of wisdom, look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding as five aggregates, also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is all emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, composition of factors and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, sameness, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, an emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, discrimination, no composition of factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no physical form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no touch, and no phenomenon. There is no eye element, soul enough to include no mind element, no consciousness element. There is no extinction of interest in soul, including no aging, death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering originates in the same power. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, no non-knowledge. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, Bodhisattvas rely on dwelling effects of wisdom. The mind without obscuration, without fear, having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of the mind. Or the Buddhas who dwell in 3 times also manifestly completely awakened to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment, on reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequal, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth since it is not false. The mantra of perfection of wisdom is declared. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, trained in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan rose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Aryabhakeshvara. Well said, son of the lineage, it is like that, it is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as your incarnated practice rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra Mahasattva Aryabhakeshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, gods, humans, heroes, and dogs, were overjoyed with highly praise that spoken by the Bhagavan. I prostrate to the gathering of the dakinis in the 3 chakras who are violated on the yoga-reduced space. Vital powers of clairvoyance and magical illumination look after practitioners like a mother of the child. I have some. Akasamara Sachodara Samaraya. Chayata, all by the teachings of the 3 supreme jewels possessing the power of truth, may inner and outer hindrances be transformed, may be dispelled, may they be changed into imperials. May all negative forces opposed now be completely pacified. May the host of 8,000 obstacles be pacified. May we be separated from problems and harmful conditions of the Dharma. May all enjoyments be in accord with the Dharma. And may there be auspicious for everything happiness here right now. Sai Shi Ji Joy Shin Meto Thank you. Sangi Chodan Soki Chonama Chanchu Badu Dani Gyasuchi Jagi Chushi Dibe Sonamki Jola Beshe Sangi Drupa Shu Sangi Chodan Soki Chonama Chanchu Badu Dani Gyasuchi Jagi Chushi Dibe Sonamki Jola Beshe Sangi Drupa Shu Sangi Chodan Soki Chonama Chanchu Badu Dani Gyasuchi Jagi Chushi Dibe Sonamki Jola Beshe Sangi Drupa Shu Kangi tuzi ni zungi tawa tungji kambi chiri kangi chun tunzi kodong kela changse lo. Good morning everyone. The cousin of somebody Sobi pay you samba. Said Teniris, Rota Sobi pay you samba la sum Dagi Gyo Mini between the Bebatan, Donga Chung Tanduman, Yeri Donga, Gyodoba Chavatan, Tenchin Tribu. Kachela God repose means re.
So we will go back to the text and pick up from the point that we left off in the previous session, which was like 10 days ago, I reckon. So we've been looking at the patience chapter. We've covered about 69 verses in the patience chapter, and today we're going to pick up from verse 70. Let's look at the outline. Let's look at where we are in the text. So I'll make it slightly bigger. So we've been looking at a section that explains how to arrest anger or fury towards those who wrong those deed to oneself. We've started with point 2 in that section, arresting it by means of patience that pays no heed to those who cause harm. And today we're going to pick up from section D, reflecting on the benefits of this specific kind of patience, which means that looking at the benefits of patience that pays no heed to those who cause harm, there are 3 main points in that section. Making effort so that one's virtue does not deteriorate, then accepting small sufferings will act to overcome the cause for the sufferings of the hells. And the last one, it is reasonable to enjoy the hardships that accomplish great purposes. Yeah, so the verses from Shantideva's text will be displayed here on the screen. We don't have a separate booklet with a root verse.
Here's the Soviet called the cousin human rosa, the Soba, and it's Soba Gombalaya, Peo Carriers. Soba Gombola Peo Carriers, Landi, and so deep the densisum tonema, Rangio Minim Bigi, and it Peos, Donga Chung Tandalani, Never Dunga Dogacheviki, and it Gobayores. Gobayores, the ten chamber jubalaya, and it Kaji Tenguras, the Tembalaya, Shumba Meba, and Gawagom Ripa Dindichagores, Dindiji, then the Sumton, the swim period, Sumdos.
So there are 3 main points here in relation to the benefits of patience, and we've already discussed patience before. So the 3 main benefits of cultivating patience are explained as, first of all, preventing one's virtue from degenerating. That's one benefit of patience, preventing one's virtue from degenerating. The second one is that it is suitable to take up small suffering if it helps you to avoid great suffering that will arise in the future. That's the second benefit of cultivating patience. And the third one is that through the austerity or through the difficulties in cultivating patience, you accomplish a great purpose. So if there's a great purpose that you get, there's a great benefit that you get when you cultivate patience, then it makes sense that you can become joyous or you can rejoice in your ability to cultivate patience.
Tereda ta geo minimbi tend beba set geo minimba chagles the geo manyam na Kevin Carriers Payores lonely geo manyam na payo carriers set here Theodorus Redosra in the geo manyam na payo carriers and the Naju dea did Devari Munde Dunga Insa and Dunga dog with Gilea geo manyama drogores. Dewan any Dewan Royalia, and Geo Manyama Drogonza, and Geo Manyamba di Nansulayati, and it can't tenayata, pay about Nevachi. Dichagoras.
So we begin with the first main point for that explains the benefits of cultivating patience, which is making effort in preventing virtue from declining. Which means that to cut to the chase, the benefit of cultivating patience is preventing virtues from declining. So what's the benefit in non-degenerated virtue, you might wonder? Why do we need to prevent virtue from declining? What is the benefit of having non-degenerated, not declined virtue? Well, all of us want to be happy and no living being wants to suffer. So if we want to overcome suffering, we need to prevent virtue from degenerating. If we want to cultivate happiness and well-being, we need to make sure that our virtue does not degenerate.
Tereda, Tezanansuta, Deva Yashudi, Deva Devi Gyu, and Gevar Islam, Deva Yashudi, Lude the Assembly Nignani, Sem Devalia, Sem Deva Chagorilla, Come Dig Deva Soya Zodia, and Semdelia Sungudas. There's a Semde Kumbal the Royalia, Semde Minimbi Gulia, Carcores, Sobacongres, the Sobacongres.
So virtue is taken to be the cause for happiness. And looking at the different types of happiness, well-being that we experience, the things that we experience on a sensorial level, this is to say with our body, for example, and there are those that we experience with our mind. So of these two types of happiness or pleasure or well-being, the one that we experience on the mental level is primary. This is the main type of happiness that we seek. For increasing mental happiness, for making sure that our mental happiness or well-being does not decline, we need virtue. We need non-degenerated virtue.
The Sobagom sound, Sobagom sounding, Sobagom sounding, Yalen Machi Sorich, Calcolea, and Yalen changing Mares, Sogor said, Dini Ungoras, Hinea two the Donlin Charangon, the Nikagon thing Marcellus. Yalen Chesna, Tinders Reda, the Yalen. That come the Sobacom said, Yana Mache, Chibu Maimba, Donlin Chiojilaya. Kugundas ra.
And in order to create that virtue, we practice patience. So then, in order to make that happen, it's not just enough to abstain from retaliating in a certain situation. It's not a simple abstaining from not reacting to a certain situation. The type of attitude that we need to take up is to willingly accept suffering, or to be willing to take it up in order to abstain from retaliating.
Tere, Nanzu Zobe Richilaya, Pigil, Nujilaya, Nujil Lemalova, so Kondru Tembaina, Pa Kondru Lemalova, Telia, Sobastila Voras. That comes the Donlin Chedi,
동화 당들링 소바 그나 차당 셈이야 동는 지금 소바 라 딘디지 송도 왔으라 데라
We have different levels of understanding what patience is. Some take patience as just mere abstention from retaliating. So, for example, someone is getting angry at you. You're not showing signs of anger in retaliating to anger with anger. So some take patience to be just not responding, just not reacting with showing anger. But here we take it a step further. It's not just not retaliating, it is also making sure that we take on suffering in preventing anger, attachment, and so forth from arising in our mind from the very outset.
These are the that give many return to Beba and Sobacomati, the Sobi, Donan Chesaki, Cap data mason, the so chaksam layer, the Jargus, chaksam the Jargus, that the Karas Chagad is lonely, and the Mombi Wangi. Sumi is Namdog Longi, and Dechaki on the Shedan on the Lebram the Sani, and they were subject Sonic, and Migiva, and Gumach the Myung Goyagi, late tea Riglia, that Donenchia, so big, that Chabale Donenchia. So, Nanzulia, that you told me when come there, Chaba your day, Chabi Shawn to Makeva, and Chabale Donenchia, and the give many between the Sobokombi and Sopigi, Donenches are you so Chabachabus.
So the first point is making efforts so that one's virtue does not deteriorate in verses 70 and 71. So we will look at the, I think that maybe. Is it better now?
It still shows this red, but now it's on before it was off.
Okay.
It's still.
Men det låter så tydligt. Does it still say there's a problem with the battery?
There is some sign in the left, but I'm not sure what it means. It was not there before.
Well, let's try it out and see how it works. Thank you. So Geshe said that here with a point that explains making effort for the sake of preventing virtue from declining, the main point that Shantideva speaks of here is putting a stop to attachment. And the reason why Shantideva here mainly focuses on attachment is that through a mind of desire and attachment, we get angry, in a sense that anger or hatred are conditioned by attachment. And if anger, hatred, aggression, and so forth arise, we perform different actions that result in unwanted situations, unwanted suffering. So therefore, in order to make sure that a virtue does not decline, Shantideva says that we need to stop with attachment, with desire. Make sure that the things that condition anger or hatred do not arise.
The Chabal Jadam, when Kimsi give me Kimjin Shen to Sonini, Zaso Khan Chechepa, Tenchon to Torix. Tejin Khan the same channel, Shadami Chechepa, Sonum Siva Toy, 10 Tim Tors.
So let's look at the root verses in Shantideva's text. So in the commentary, it's in verses 70 71. page 26. Just going to open the other translation, just a second. So it's in page 40 in the root text. So for example, if a fire in one house has moved into another house, it is right to remove and get rid of straw and such things that the fire will spread to. Then verse 71 says, likewise, when my mind is attached to something and the fire of hatred spreads, I should immediately get rid of it for fear of my merit being burnt.
Terdadi lelauredota in a bed of the channels Davalaya ani Nanglaya Tsatsik Tsashachin company Tsachin member to say the Tiomaras Tanganzu Perdo Imbaina Perg Rockbat and Rombatozugi Simjamam Soganza Nangi Surchilia and the Tanka Tsat Kochi Tsashu Zig Shagarwa Simjin Soyachet. Is a duck any chicky Kambala measure and made it sergeant Salasawina and Kamba member in Yangashim Shujans and Sala Chan Devina. Pick Kamba Kor Sigra in Yangayoras, Tinza, and Zadma you go rust. Chesa Kambal then it shows a Zadi, and you go a chagros. The Dinan Shingi Nyenda Pigilaya 6 charge. Ani chadang wangi shedangi wangi tili ani rangi gewa nyamdroya nyenga yenza ani nyengi rilaya ani chaksemdi dorgo gres ti mador baina ani rangi kasota gewa junchini ani sonum meba pigi gi ani nganson kiela soba o dindik ju chadogros ro.
Shantideva says in these verses, for example, if a fire in one house has moved to another house, it is right to remove and get rid of straw and such things. So you might find it a little bit awkward, for it's not that we store straw and so forth in our houses, right? It's not that you have stores of straw and the like, either inside your house or next to it, but it's more common in houses, for example, in Tibet. When Geshe grew up in a nomadic environment where you have animals and you also need to store enough food for the animal, particularly for the winter time. So you have one section of the encampment in which you have stores of grass that you pack for your animals. Now, if a fire breaks and there is a danger that it will leap from one tent to the next or from one house to the next, then you need to make sure that first of all you remove that heap of straw, because if you don't do that, everything might catch fire. So the house is important, straw is secondary to that, right? So in order to say the important thing, the big thing, you sacrifice the small thing like straw. So similarly here, Shantideva says, when we look at the process by which our virtue declines, it begins with attachment to such things as relatives, those who are close to our heart. And because of that attachment, we become angry in certain situations, or we develop a sense of hatred. And through hatred, our stores of virtue decline. So Shantideva says here that it's best to rid yourself of that sense of attachment, the sense of desire. If you don't do that, and anger does arise, and you will act upon that anger in doing all sorts of actions which are motivated by anger, you will end up with a lack of merit that will contribute to a birth in miserable states of existence.
김나도 집어 송미 된 잘로 소바 된 총대 도리기 차바 미리고 대신도 년도 소바 강의 셈참 대단한 네버 중에 경기 세단기 매체버린 기위 기위 손을 기너츠버 토바예 차비 시드니 대면라 도리기 차바 미리 소스.
Let's look at a commentary of Geshe Dhammalinchen. It's in page 27 in that chapter. So it says, for example, if a house is on fire and the fire has moved to another house where it spreads to the grass and wood, then it is suitable that one sacrifices the hay and wood in order to save the wealth of the house. It would be unsuitable to have attachment to them. Similarly, if the fire of hatred is spreading due to the condition of attachment for friends and so forth, and there is a doubt that the wealth of merit and so forth will burn, then the basis for one's attachment is suitable to be given up without doubt, and it is unsuitable to be attached.
단이바 동화 총을 당들라니 예외 동화 교도가 차와니 배단 텐도 당부 빼니 이 니시도 찬나 동화 묘원교로 세나스.
Now, the second point in explaining the benefits of these specific types of patience is accepting small suffering will act to overcome the cause for the sufferings of the hell. There is an example, or this is an analogy that Shantideva presents here, and then he explains the meaning of the analogy. Let's look at verse 72, but before we do so, there is an argument that Geshe Dhammalinchen brings up in his commentary. If one is separated from friends and relatives, one will suffer.
대다디칼이야 동화 총 당들레니 예외 동화 교도가 체시 동화 총이 루 동화래야 고고도스 라 루든 셈닝 난기 루 동화디 동화 총지니 아니 디 동화가 고고도스.
Before we get to the meaning of this section, just keep in mind that we're looking at the second point in the outline that is relevant to the benefits of patience, which says that it is better to take up small suffering in order to avoid future greater suffering, such as, for example, suffering of miserable states of existence. So when Shantideva says that it's better to take up small suffering or to accept small suffering, it refers to physical suffering rather than mental suffering. So it's better to take up some degree of small suffering in order to prevent greater suffering from arising in the future.
That bena lu dunganang ni bena mi ludeng dungal joros lul tembi dungadi and dunga chunju shuchik ra dunga chunju shuchik the songtang on the songtang tubaina unzichi tubaina and mi lu the tembi dungadi roridu nani the dunga chung shuchik
There are different degrees of physical suffering. There's the one that we experience as human beings, but then when we compare our physical suffering to suffering of other living beings within the 6 realms of existence, we can say that actually, in comparison with others, we get the better hand. In comparison with others, we do experience physical suffering, but it is not as significant or severe as other living beings.
다들 동화 춘중 임바 디 가르스는데 아니 그나 뒤용 그찬이야 뒤용 비tun동래도스 먼저 미기 안 세티 잠블링기 미 세세디 마나 로ጃ탈라마도 되게 매웠어 안 뒤에 뒤지고 나와야 뇽친 루동아디 다디 루동아디 아니 루통이 동아디 먼저 뇽 말았어 뒤저 찬이나래 아니 지 비기 냐와이다 통절도 떼봐이나야 쇼지 깊에 아니 동화 춘중래도 왔어 텐디 찬 루동아 아니 동화 될 때냐 지 깨워니 깨워 주인치니 그 뇽고야지 차금도 왔어 도시온 칸을 떼봐이나 아니 루동아디 미 루동아디 동화 춘중래샤스.
So we do experience physical pain or discomfort, suffering, but still in comparison with others, it is smaller. From the point of view of duration, for example, we experience suffering in smaller durations. When we consider our lifespan, for example, as human beings, at most we will live for 100 years, and at the end of our life, the body will be left behind, and we will continue further on. So since the body is left behind, physical suffering that we will experience anyway will not continue with us to our next state of rebirth. So it might sound that 100 years is a long time, but when you think about it in a great span of time, it's actually not that great. It's quite small or insignificant. When you think about it in relation to, for example, animals or pretas or hellish state of existence, while we do experience suffering or pain, physical suffering as human beings, in comparison with other living beings, it is actually smaller. Particularly as human beings, if we do experience suffering, then at the end of our life, as the body is being cast aside, then also suffering will cease to operate on that body. It's not that it will continue with us to next lifetime. But when you're born from one lifetime to the next, again and again and again, in a miserable state of existence, your suffering is perpetuated over those states of existence. So in that sense, we do experience suffering as human beings, but in comparison with other situations, it's not that great.
Tinza ani ko chechong chan song tang wai na nganzu dunga di setu goyachik ra dunga de tanglen tu goyagi ne dan chik chagoros yang nguye ne chu ton song tang wai na nganzu le dunga di lu dunga di yongyong bach karche bai na lu ya dunga chik yongyong bach yimba di lu khorang ge ranjin di ani dunga ge ranjin chen chen ban sa and di tolaya chi kari roji ani shabai na ya ko ani madeva dunga chi yong de ji chag do tinza ngoi chania nganju thang le goya chi ro odindi ji chagores.
So we need patience. We need patience with physical suffering. We need to develop ways of taking up those different degrees of physical suffering. But also another way of looking at that is that when we think of a state of existence and having a body such as this, it goes without saying that it comes with suffering. It goes without saying that it comes with suffering because the nature of this body is the nature of suffering. So there is no surprise whatsoever that we do experience suffering or pain in dependence upon this body. And therefore, there's a purpose in cultivating patience, in considering that the nature of the body is the nature of suffering.
There that di kezi thandle mathu bai na and di giched dunga chunjun di ani songju giched ani khaso da ji da lule changro da sendele chaji ani dunga chunjun di so mathu ni ani shadam so bigi ani shawn kyobai na teni ka mambula ya ani chi sem dung nyong ko yagi nezu chabana pambu shujres tini zawni da chi nezu singin jigi ani jiwo gyar tu yagi nezu chi zawni ne mares ra.
So if you cannot accept this kind of suffering and you think that for the sake of protecting my body, I need to be attached to the body. And because of your attachment to the body, anger arises in a certain situation when you're incapable of accepting suffering, then a mind that is controlled by anger will ensure that your suffering and pain, at least the one that is experienced in a mental level, will be much longer. You might end up for eons being tormented by unwanted suffering. And therefore, it makes sense that it is better to accept or to take up small suffering in order to avoid greater suffering. So remember that Shantideva is using an analogy and explaining the meaning of that analogy in his text. So let's begin first of all with the analogy in verse 72. So it says, "It is not excellent if a man condemned to death is released after having its hand cut off. Is it not excellent that if I'm spread from hell by way of human suffering?" Sorry. Is it not excellent if I'm spared from hell by way of human suffering? The commentary to this section says, if a person condemned to death is freed upon having its hand cut off, then how is it not good? It is good. Likewise, if one is freed from the suffering of hell merely by experiencing the human sufferings of hunger and thirst, then how is that not good? It is appropriate to tolerate small sufferings to reverse large sufferings.
Penatang ansung du Geshe ki gyudi chadang chagores. Inza da chadang la ya ta ngansung de tabak chibi gi tab di ani chadang la ya donen che ya chadang goya di chagores. Ta chadang goje gi tab di sem gi bi gi lojong ji chagre modo shema kangi jang ta menza ta sem gu lojong chi ondi sem la ya komdi ten pro semleya chik pen chambaten inji la soba an dami du tobe sheraleya kongdi tembaleya chik shukchempo chik kongdi chego das tuzemang stanchen kong semleya kongdi chewaleya ani pen ta chegam la soba dinji gi lula tembe dunga dinji yonsik wajros inza tutso peti an dunga tus tan dinen chini semleya komdi tenyanti o chigudus.
So the example of the analogy that Shantideva presents here is looking at the causes that produce suffering. The causes that produce suffering are anger, attachment, and the like. If we want to be free from suffering, which means that if we want to attain the state of liberation, what we need to stop is anger and attachment. And the way to put a stop to anger and attachment is to train a mind in acquiring new habits. There's no other way of going about it. There's no other way of attaining the state of liberation other than putting a stop to anger and attachment. So we do that through cultivating compassion, through cultivating loving kindness, through cultivating wisdom that realizes selflessness. And not only we need to cultivate that, we spend a long time in acquiring those new habits. And in so doing, it is possible that we will experience some physical discomfort, so physical suffering. It is possible for hunger, thirst, and so forth to arise. But here Shantideva says that it's better to take it up, it's better to accept that, rather than to react to that with attachment, anger, and so forth.
Terida ranganza chadang ya kyo tomo mu kom de yonza di gi kapde lanchini and di dosho ki lole ya komdi tembala ya and shukchembo ro komdi shukchembo tengo gra ta komdi shukche da ma sedi gyun kyang tu da ma tu ya rale da ta gyun kyang ne chewala ya ta nam gyu nganzu chik pi gi ani pa chik sem yang lu yang ani chik chegam dunga se chedo chik tuzo tang de di tuzo di nyong tang gu da sra ta di tuzo di nyong tang di ani chegam la sobe dunga di ani nega yong sik bajres yong gres ine yang yong ba di ya dongni chet ko du sra so dire shada.
We've been affected by anger, attachment, and so forth, since some without beginning and up until now. And in order to oppose anger and attachment, which are so deep-rooted, we need to spend a lot of time in opposing them. We need also to do it continuously. Over time, we need a consistent effort in opposing anger, attachment, and the like. And it is possible that every once in a while we will get distracted. Such as, for example, when some discomfort or suffering, such as hunger and thirst, arise, if we spend a lot of time in just dealing with those discomforts, it will take away from the continuous effort that we need to spend in cultivating things that oppose anger, attachment, and so forth. So we take into consideration that it is possible for such physical sufferings to arise, for physical discomfort, for hunger, thirst, and so forth. But rather than spending most of our time in being distracted by that, we minimize that. We willingly take up those discomforts, this suffering, in order to make sure that we spend a greater time continuously in acquiring better habits.
Terda nanzugi tendigi dunga chunjundi tangdu le matu ya di khares laundi nanzu dewa thoya di chi ani lu dewa tsamato se digi chi ani lu dewa tsamato teli ani saba teli gachewa teli puta ramwi ani semdi di nanzu nyongu yo marasta 통구 요마라스 디만동디 아니 지 리우 대와 춘준이야 차체니 아니 동아 춘준 려바이나 당들레 마투야기 강가디 데닐레기요서레스 다 딘디리야 아니 동네 지지는 피기기 아니 샘기 냠니 용이 지바이나 아니 룰라 가주스 가두 쳐바이나야 샘기 시데디 자우니 라기요서 마레스 다 디말라나 그 룰라야 가르쳐 바이나야 아니 그 식식지다 아니 지 기부진강이야 대투게식 야식야담부터 용구여러스라.
What's the reason for our inability to currently take on those small types of suffering? Our inability to do that is because our primary concern is still with physical pleasure, physical happiness, physical comfort. Our primary concern throughout our life is mainly with the experiences that we have on a physical level. We find it really difficult to conceive of something that can go way beyond that, that can be way greater than physical pleasure, physical comfort. But then when we understand that there is something that can be much greater than physical comfort or physical pleasure, then that becomes our primary concern. And if we make that our primary concern, then for that sake, if we need to take up some degrees of suffering or discomfort, we do that with a mind that is undaunted, a mind that is a peaceful state of mind. So think about it, if you change your orientation, rather than taking physical pleasure as your main priority for the duration of your life, you think that there is a pleasure or happiness that are much greater than this. Geshe reckons that over time you would be able to deal with some forms of physical discomfort or physical suffering with a mind that is still at peace.
Je kanzana nganzada semlaya degi medi semlaya semla dungashu chilebayina dene ranso chedi teni yungdos ro ani chik lu nasa kazu shukchimbu yobayina semle tesam kanga mena chik ranso chese zawni misik waras ro.
There are situations that people find no happiness, no well-being whatsoever on the mental level, to the point in which they even have suicidal thoughts. But we can avoid those states. It is possible to reach the state in which, even if there is physical pain, your mind is still happy, your mind is still imbued with mental well-being. And if you're able to develop that, even if your body is in pain and suffering, there is no way that you'll be driven into into the verge of committing suicide.
Bena nganzu dus tada bena tse di zu ani lu deyagi tablam anchi ani longju ra benjer la so ta dinji le ya zu bene ani tuje tani ani roding di anchi longju bewu ro ji yoba ina ya an di ji le ya chi ani samgam di posto bo ro ta ani chi bena ani chagdo mawa rensam mawa ani chi gecha shuchia ani semba magi ba yoya di man ro chi chagdo asro.
And we can find examples of people that have a life that is full of resources, full of enjoyment, they have enough money, enough wealth, and yet it seems that although on a physical level, things seem to be working quite well, mentally, there's still a lot of unhappiness, jealousy, competitiveness, mental unhappiness, and so forth. We see that such things do exist.
Benantanga Rathanon Chonsado di Kotasajilaya and Lo Manshu, the Tasajil Tamanza, and Tasa di Tasalaya Messicoran Tasal dating in Gi, and Tawatonda Mambuyores Ra. Dinanolaya Pi Nam Gunding any Lobjon Yongian Dan, Mengin Dramadayores. The Lobjon Menginji by Nayako, Messicoran Tasal den. Tamo chong zhuang di pe ene yang tsenpo zhuchi. Ani pak pepo chik toni, ani zhuo dingi, da di ko chong digi, ani chik pigi tang tsenpo zhuchi tenzi, me tsama lo namgi ko chik pigi nyam lemba zhuchi da, pecha yabu tindi ki tsigi meba ina, shi zhuang di pe yang tsen chong dingi, pe mambu yores ro. Da di karre ro, zhuwe chani, longzhu ki chani, pe gyogures.
For example, Geshe, growing up in a monastic institution, says that since you have in such a monastic institution sometimes thousands of monks, you have those that are very learned and those that are not learned. And sometimes you find that even within those that were not good in their studies, those that have spent decades in the monastery, and yet the academic level was not good, the process of dying actually works quite astoundingly well. Sorry?
Process of mind? No. Process.
The process of death. Yeah, death. Dying.
Sorry.
So Geshe says that sometimes it's quite surprising because there are people, sometimes when you think of the people that you know in the monastery, and you know that some of them were not great scholars. Actually, they studied quite poorly, and you think that probably in the practice they haven't done quite well. When certain signs or indications appear in the process of dying, you come to see that actually, even though they weren't good students, they are very good practitioners. So when someone goes through that peaceful state of dying, where certain indications or signs of having a good process of death occur, it is with people that had a way of living that was without a sense of attachment to physical comforts, material possessions, and so forth.
Tinza ngazu tse dilaya chade dida chakdang korang ki shangwan kyurde giyogadi besi wures. Da chakdang korang ki shangwan kyurni ani lunga yiksum chobadi titolo droshabana ani sem pusu tol droyajida magiwa mang droyaj lu toni dunga ti ko kaduyina kandasiki tungyen zombayna ya lu le tembi dunga chik nandula gyumachi di yungu doas. Di tolaya ani sem dunga chik lebayna ani lu sem nika tolaya kangan changwan di teni ani ta semgom chudroya ani chi netsun damidal hagde ti ransing yungu das tinza ta di mayong yechit ani manju sem tone ni chi ani sogom chegore sadi zu di sem gi shidi tuyang chit redos ra me shembala ya chi ani khete susu kyong ki goya ko tindito je remodos ra.
We do have attachment to this lifetime, to affairs of this life. And often when we look at the type of the attachment that we have to possessions, resources, and so forth, it is indicative of how attached we are to the affairs of this life. And through that, our mind becomes more narrow. It becomes less happy. And even if we have physically comfortable conditions, good conditions, still we need to take into consideration that there will still be difficulties for us, because this is the nature of a body such as that. It is within the nature of suffering, and therefore, even if externally the situation would be good, we'll still continue to experience different types of sufferings and problems. So if we react to our sufferings and problems in willingly engaging with our disturbing emotions, with anger, attachment, and so forth, our happiness will grow stronger and stronger, greater. So our unhappiness will become greater and greater, stronger and stronger. And therefore, in order to prevent our mental happiness from increasing, we need to cultivate patience. We need to cultivate patience, and if we do that, that would also affect the happiness and the well-being that we have in this life, let alone affecting also our future lifetimes. It will also affect the happiness and the well-being that we have in this life.
동안 됐자무도 되셔나스 다디 동안 됐자물랑 다기 써보면이나 되는 예위 동안 규초지도 도매치스.
Applying the meaning to the analogy, will begin with a certain argument that Geshe Rinchen presents to verse 73. I cannot bear these sufferings. Reading through the verse, it says, if I cannot bear even the present sufferings, then why do I not reverse anger because of the suffering of hell? In answering this argument, I cannot bear these sufferings, it says, if I cannot bear even the small present sufferings of hunger, thirst, and being cut with weapons, then why do I not make an effort to reverse the cause of the sufferings of hell? That's suitable to reverse.
지금 더 전체 중세 넘어서 다들 동안 저디 다들 동안 됐잖아 다기서 보면은 연생 되는 야외 동안 규초와티스 더블 미제바 베베 더블 차오스.
As it says here, when it asks, then why do I not make an effort to reverse the cause of the sufferings of hell? They are suitable to reverse, so it makes sense to oppose the causes of the sufferings of the hell.
Tinza pena nanzo da dendro da ngando sech yorwas ra pena meda tundro ta da dendro da ngando seti mas meda tundro ta mele ki ya gyuchi da tundro la ki ya gyuchi gyni gyumanda ni yungu yobat pese ures ra gyuchi ki toni ni ga gendo aji yobasi waras.
So, for example, we have pleasant states of existence and miserable states of existence. Like, for example, being born as a human being is being born in a pleasant state of existence, whereas being born as an animal is to be born in a miserable state of existence. So there are causes for those states of existence. There is a cause for being born as a human being, and there is a cause for being born as an animal. It's not the same cause. There are different causes.
Terida chidang chakbegi manzuta migi ro zambaning migi ludengi any lune yulia and chakbayungu yores and tundru lune yulia chakbayungu yores nyawabi in a zoo di nyawabi and lune yuzu di and kondro shagdos ra.
So when we look at attachment, for example, there is a type of attachment that is the cause for being born as a human in this world. There is also a type of attachment that causes a rebirth in the animal realm. There are causes for being born in a hellish state of existence. Anger is such cause. Anger is a cause for being born in a hellish state of existence.
There dan on the chicken lamodelia, on some of that drogo and the chicken lamodelia, pig that ninji that chamba the chanju sensing yanada, chod curious. There menaya chick and gesem jeda, and it kongju semdi. Zavan the Ponto Mardina Kanji, and it want to machiwaji Tony, not to sepe tubaina, and Dembra Kiagi, and the Reva Pechimbo, Milunayagita, Reva Pechimbo Chaguas race.
All of us will get to the point in which we'll be on the verge of dying. We will die in this life, and we will get to the point in which we'll soon die. So if we can practice loving kindness and compassion, bodhicitta, at this point, that would be excellent. Even if we don't get to practice loving kindness, compassion, bodhicitta, when we are on the verge of death, if we can still maintain some virtuous state of mind, if we can prevent anger from becoming manifest, we have a way of ensuring that in the next lifetime, again, we are born in a favorable state of existence, like again, being born as a human being in a pleasant state of existence.
Dangan Dunga Chimbu, Yavi Dunga, and it Kawamongolaya, and Yavan Neagi, Deba the Suchi Yomaras, the Melni Jigi, and Kondrolaya, Donlin Chicoya,
no one wants to experience suffering, such as the suffering of the hellish state of existence. No one wants them. And therefore, since the cause of those states of existence is anger, then we need to avoid that. We need to abstain, to restrain our mind from not becoming angry.
There is that control a donin chelia, control kaltembi, you so digiti, and Kangochigoza, and Chabadi Shedangi, you, and we Juros Chagdazra, Chabakaju, Shuchio, Titsugi, and Chadota, and Dansam Kigdazra.
And if we need to avoid anger, we need to address the cause of anger. And the cause of anger is attachment. And therefore, we also need to prevent attachment from arising in the mind stream. This is a cause for anger.
That's what Tenchamu Dribika Lagawa Ribalanis, Har Lu Chitsam, Chuswejan, Randun the Shendon Kaya Mandribi, Gabatan, Tadika Sobachin, Rota like Gentleman, Gawaribos.
Let's look at a third point in the section that explains the benefits of this specific kind of patience. So the third point is saying that it is reasonable to enjoy hardships that accomplish great purposes. There are two main points in that section. Feeling regret for how many bodies we have wasted in the past and still not accomplish either our own, not others' welfare. The second is, it is reasonable to enjoy accomplishing the welfare of all migrators by being patient with present hardships. Let's begin with verse 74.
Dadi har luchism chusue jang se randun de shendun kanya mandu bin gyabanes tanganzu kewan deni tibi ani kewa chi khamala ya sum tawai na ani mulu chi khazus lang yor se thangar chu na chame lang yor was ra diza da di rila ya ani shendun da randun da shendun kanya dru matu ni ani 단답도 하임바디 아니 간주 첸디게 아니 lunga yisum ki chajol tena hakoyores hakutuores ra tinza tadi kewa tindijilana yange ani chi mombatang chapatang shedan tindi wand sonchene ranjini ge kan drum tugmundu sambige ani samujyo bana tan gebachi kigro astra.
So when we think of the first point that comes out of the heading of feeling regret for how many bodies we've wasted in the past and still not accomplished either our own or others' welfares or benefits, think about it in terms of this lifetime. We are still alive, but at some point we will get to the point of death. And when we think of the ways in which we have spent our life, whether we've managed to accomplish our own benefit and the benefit of others, then take a greater perspective. And being around since time without beginning and up until now, and having already been through countless times in which we were born as human beings, and again, not being able to accomplish our own welfare and the welfare of others. How wasteful it is. We can see that based upon this life, not only we're incapable of accomplishing a greater benefit for ourselves and others, we also often quite entrenched in our attitude of confusion, anger, attachment, and so forth. And we can think that also in previous lifetimes, our mind has been under the control of confusion, of ignorance, of anger, attachment, and so forth. And through them, we were not able to accomplish our own welfare and not the welfare of others.
아니 직바 야브카야 가르라바이네야 시트 비카메야 아니 니지 로종 딘지도즈레야 지 로종 제 총문도 삼성기 삼로지야바이나 아니 로종 디 겨바지야바이나 아니 로종 디 체야야 셈슈키에서로스라.
And even if you cannot think about it in terms of previous lifetimes, if you think about it in relation to this life, then it is possible that you get to a certain point in your life where you reflect back and you think that when I was younger, my mind was much better, was much sharper. I could have used it for something, for studying, for example, and using a mind that is young or fresh and sharp could have been so much more useful and powerful in studying a particular thing. You can also use that way of thinking in order to prevent yourself from falling into a sense of idleness and thinking that in the future, I might regret not using the time or not using my mind at this point in time for training, for studying a particular thing.
Geshe modobi oni chiksuze riba drimchini ngoyu nezuki pigige lojong tiche tuyo maros tatti matu di ya leondi tattini ko mzi yashudi chadang tolan jondi ta yaz leondi kanga che imbaros ta kanga che ondi tini ta rewat chusa masuna rewat masuna chusa di da ani shi ni 아니 건조라야 아니 레워주 거야지 로 데모카딘진이야 레워주 거야지 다들 레워주야디 아니 지여바디 로종 장치야지 강송바디 로종 치치니 냠린지 공직대야디 델라가지 아니 레워주니 레워주투야지 매완자 다 딘리치고 잠발라 다 소소 류기온디 아니 지 류가 엄부터스 쭉 텔레템비게지 남시도서 셀라마슬레차 템버 셀라마슬레차 안 데리자는 상이 제도에도 어디리 차로도서라.
But then it's often the case that when we're young, we are still susceptible to a lot of distraction. We take up states of mind such as anger and attachment and so forth, and we don't really use our mind in order to focus on a research of reality. But if we were to get some focus in our life, particularly when we're young, if we become concentrated and focused, when we spend more time in studying reality, the way that things work, then we can make sure that we live our life in the best possible way. And also our practice becomes much better. We pacify anger, attachment, and so forth, and that will make a difference in our life. Otherwise, if we don't do that, it is possible that we spend most of our time in still indulging in a sense of attachment, anger, and so forth. And when things do not work out for us in the later stage of our life, then we turn our mind towards the object of refuge or towards the Buddha, the teacher. And we think, well, at this point in time, we might think that I could have used my time more skillfully, or I should have used my time better. But even if you then at that point in time try to spend more time and more energy in studying, reflecting, and so forth, you find that as the body is getting older and older, the physical faculties start to decline. And as they start to decline, they become more unclear. There's something that obscuring our faculties. And also our state of mind is not that clear. You might study something today and still forget it tomorrow. It happens as you grow older.
There ganzi dinji rojigda tandabad yagu chomundu sambi. Ra ani gyoba jigyoba na ani lojong di chihalaya pendo yunguyasare semshuda masna yunguyasare ra di yongba na nimachigla lojong cheba na di tsugi ani suzu semne pengiros semgi shidele pengiros ra an di tsugi gyo chima kelengi na gyo chima no suina da di pengiros ra dichi digi an dinji gyoba di yogoya logic.
And therefore, this sense of regret that Shantideva mentions here, feeling regret for how many bodies we have wasted in the past and still not accomplished our own or others' welfare, is something that could be useful. It could be useful in thinking that I don't want to regret having wasted my life or my time in this life. If you do it for one day, you get benefit from that, at least for that day, making sure that you do not waste your time during that passing day. If you also think about it in terms of future lifetimes, if you believe that future lifetimes exist, not only it will benefit you for the duration that you make sure that you do not regret wasting the time that you have at hand, but you also think that in so doing, I'm also improving my situation in future lifetimes.
Seven debut tend to sell a soap, Yawa Tonga Nyung Kirkian, Dagi Rangi tend on the Jinju Machisus.
So that's verse 74. Let's look at the wording of this verse. It says, "For the sake of my desires, I experienced thousands of years in hell, but I enacted the purpose of neither others nor myself."
Har Dagi Shinjulogi Yulasi when debut tend the Lengi Bala Shube, Sebala Soba, Yawa Donga, Gawa Tonga Nyung Kirkian, Dagi Rangi tend on the Shinji Tang and Joseph on the Machiso.
The commentary to this verse says, "Because before I was engaged in negative actions due to desire for the mistaken object of my craving, I've experienced for thousands of years the suffering of being cut and so forth in hell. Despite this, I have not achieved the purpose of self or others."
Niba Tati Kachi Sober Chinin, Rotadaki Ten, Jobala, Gawa Ripanis.
The second point in that section says, "It is reasonable to enjoy accomplishing the welfare of all my greatest by being patient with present hardships." That's in verse 75.
Then Tedzum Nemla, Tension Tajan Drukuri, Dravid Nurse, Dongala, Gaumbashin the Charis.
And it reads, "But now, since great purpose will be established from harm which is not as much, I should be solely joyful towards such sufferings that dispel the harms of my great beings."
Jolosenda, Shendun Dribi Tugi Kachin Dene, Tetsum never melas. Tell a Denny Tension Tajan Drubin Kiwi, Dravid never Tada Sevi, Kaji Yudunga, Tandulani Gawa, Bashi Zicha Rixo.
Geshe Dhammarin's commentary says, this austerity at the time of achieving the purpose of others does not harm me that much, but it depends on it I achieve great purpose. Therefore, it is suitable to be only happy and accept the sufferings of the austerities that clear away all the harms of my greatest.
Keta shendun dribi tuki kache sedi, shendun dribi tuki kache sedi, so di ani lojong ki kabro redo asra, nanzu ta ninji ki lo jangbala ya, ani ninji ki lo kia ki parche do di chakdang choli ro chigdo as. That means that the deep donin chi on digi kyo tomo me kom denza teleten being on zulia kanga chi the tigros dra ine kanga di susule nig mares mende ma mase teleten ni ani tanda chimbu shuch rang da shen tamji gi ani tanda trip to ge yungu yanza tinji kache di pe thand lenjin gaw gomri ge chagores.
When the text says this austerity at the time of achieving the purpose of others, it refers to, for example, some difficulties that we experience at the time of cultivating compassion that is seeking the purpose or the benefit of others. Since time without beginning and up until now, we have been affected by things that are contrary to compassion. We have obstacles, hindrances for cultivating compassion. Our mind is still partial. It is partial because of anger and attachment. So, of course, when we try to cultivate compassion towards sentient beings, we do experience difficulties. We do face problems, but they do not harm you. Those problems will not harm you. And if you continue to cultivate compassion in that situation, the difficulties that you will experience will not harm you. You'll actually be able to be more effective in your ability to be of benefit to others.
Tere benata bena ninji la ya ninji lo la ya ani jomdar chingi chimba na ninji kadzu ki ninji ki lo de shuk chewa ta di chögi ani suzu sem de pa phem ro yo ro chadang chon ro yo ba chadang kesa gi yulme na chadang ki maros chadang chon ro yo ba chadang chon ro ngi midi ninji shuk chim midi ani kawal dena ya ani desagi ani yul telya pengros ani kaw dron soso kaw drona kibu yungros sendi kewa chimala dron ti pengros tinza ta ninji lojong chingi midi ta shendun chimbu druguyosras ra.
So if you, for example, train in the development of compassion, and the mind of compassion becomes strong, grows stronger in your mind, you have lesser degrees of anger and attachment present, and your mind becomes more at ease, more peaceful. And the stronger your compassion becomes, the more you can be of, or the greater you can be of benefit to others, to the point in which wherever you are, you can still use whatever means you have to be of benefit to others. You can be useful to others, and that will also make your mind happy. Not only it is helpful in terms of this life, it will also contribute to happiness in future lifetimes.
Shame.
Yeah. So Claire is asking, when you need to resolve a conflict with someone, how do you stop feelings aroused by the injustice of the situation from getting in the way of calm and peaceful discussion amid conflict resolution? When in a conflict situation, sometimes I can't help but get very shaky despite trying to stay calm. Sometimes I feel I need courage as well as patience. 산산 그런 미 셴반년도 저버든지 직쇼기로 아니 콘서 카르체 디 8월 부 카체바디 미릭소든 직삼로 샤스도 야보 말에 콘서트디 제요 말에 상 샤스도 de samlo tawa ina sem tembo shide koyambo de tugi maresa. Ni chezan de mi reiso den di samlo tan di kande Chicago res. Tidas soba gaddu ya mana chik soba shodu takuran sem pasha lo de sansan de tarsi gaddu dosa. Cheza sem kabdila sem samlo tan 근데 세보 치에 차기 말해서 가르치고 그랬어.
디 인자레스 라카즈나 디다 콘도 슈크체모 사고라스 라 콘도 슈크체모 캐나 룬다스 게디 피기게 자와 칸체바 디코 인다 민기 아니 사운드 당이 로 디짱 마르와스 라 캐나 콘도 디 캐나 룬다리고라스 라
Yeah, Geshe says that it happens. Sometimes you become so overwhelmed by anger that your body starts shaking. As Kles says, that sometimes the body, sometimes you get very shaky. It does happen that when anger becomes so strong that not only your state of mind is as such, but also it affects your physical body, right? You become shaky and the like.
The passion megi yabu chigdu dugja chigdu segi lodi 참아까 거야지 이 사람도 참아까 거야지 레모스 거의 결례 장부 덴바 용초그리 주마 용초그로 왔어 덴바랑레 디코 디카 거에서 기어마라스 이네 난주기 아니 검시로지 소수로라 마테디 컨트롤한 레저라스 대견 디레저스 소수로라 마테나야 그 용초그로 와 삼성기 고향 그 싸움을 줘봐나 control progress and dini and piggy lenny number namjutia jun tourists right.
And then when you think of in having a certain conflict with another person, when you think of the situation, you think that point or that person has done something that is not justified, is unreasonable and so forth. It's not that you need to stop this way of thinking. When you have a certain conflict with others, sometimes you recognize that a certain thing that they've done was not the right thing to do. That an injustice has been done. Or you can also think of some positive, or you can think of positive or correct points in the situation, but you can also think of a certain misrepresentation of reality in that situation. So it's not that we want to put a stop to all this process of thinking when you get angry. When you have a certain conflict with another person. What we want to put a stop to is a default reaction to a situation by which you become angry as a response to something that the other person has said or done. You can recognize injustice, but still without giving rise to anger in your mind. We're so used to anger that anger arises as a default mechanism. So what we're training at is to try to prevent anger from arising, even if you recognize that a certain injustice has been done.
And Chavan Noria Tindi, Samlo Nora Tindi, Yunguras, this Nanzan Young Chogras, and then I sing Pasho Malaya, the young Chogre Sambigi, Samlo Diabana, and it Nambur da, Kechada, Chavakari Yombainea, Co, and it young Choyach, the young Chogra Samsung, Koyang Diabana, and it ending Condri Masaya, Pinguasayas.
So one way of doing that is to think that, first of all, in terms of my own personal experience, I have been affected by anger, attachment, confusion before. And being under the control of those afflictive states of mind, I did also behave in a way that was not right. It happened to me. If it happens to me that because of my anger, attachment, and so forth, in certain situations, I do not behave in the right way, why is it not possible for the other person in the conflict to behave in that way when they are under the control of such afflictive states of mind. It is possible for that to happen to me, and it is just as well possible that it will happen for another person. So when you think that it is not unlikely to happen, it is not unlikely to arise, then you can prevent some levels of anger from arising and deal with the situation with a way that is more relaxed.
nganzu nge sambala nganzu lu di yer sawe jele ya ra saji nyawle mi pumbu sungda saji nyawle mi pumbu di yer sawe jele ya bi ji sorwachik ro sorwachik le de wasares ta ina ya gyundeng ji ani sowa di thambi ji chagdang mosum ya ani nyamshir da masum this ji donlen ji ya ge ani nyamlen che ding ji mai na ani khonro de seva ina ya and lamsan did the nyamdo the part control the share and some down to yet this Jungius or some does that.
So the way that Geshe looks at that is in recognizing the nature of this body. The nature of this body, which is a body that is in the nature of suffering, it is what we call the contaminated, appropriated aggregate. It is within the nature of suffering. Then of course certain situation will occur. They will arise. And anger will arise, but you recognize that this is the nature of the body. And it is likely that anger will arise in a certain situation. So you recognize the points in which anger arises, and at that point, you also applying techniques for trying to overcome that anger.
and Tim Shadang Dechak said, Dimji Sungoras. It's one day the Yungu and these are that Pena Dechak like in Namoya, and it long you only, and Desha yon there. Kondru Namoya, long drawn chondi, Kondru sat there. That dig candy, younger, that can't be Chilong Chichog, Nangasam Ken Chichog. Yen Karina Yungudas, what did you do? Things and Ludi Yoverina, Homana, Sad Samakau to question. Timatu Bardo, Condotes Massage Peshi, Kalakabu.
When you look at the explanation of the makeup of the body from a tantric perspective, there is an explanation of the system of channels that run through the body. And some of our afflictive states of mind are associated with particular channels. Like, for example, there's a channel of anger. There's a channel for attachment. In the sense that when there is a wind energy that flows through that channel, it comes together with a mind of attachment, or a mind of anger, and so forth. So the system of channels exists within the body. So either we put a stop to all that system of channels, or that we try to block, to constrict some of those channels in order to prevent some of those afflictive states of mind from arising. But we recognize that since this is the makeup of the body, since those channels also support the movement of consciousnesses and winds that are associated with those afflictive states of mind, of course they will arise. But what I can do is try as much as possible to minimize that. And if we are in a practice trying to minimize that as much as we can, then a state of mind will be made more vast and spacious, more relaxed in our life. Thank you. So we will leave it here for now and with the dedication prayers. Yododa lama sangye dubine doa chikyamala pade sala gopashu Rinpoche make pana kegirchi kevanya pame pai Kone kondo pewashu Kowe shikamdi pendang dewa manu juwe Chere siwa tenzin yatsoi Shabe sinde wadu tengerochi Chinchang Yawe Tenzi Yompewe
Chosun ko wele monturo pada sotu kondu shaten shu.